this is the part that I knew I was asked to provide today. And I would like to begin with 3 short, simple stories. Sound all right? So the first one. There was a company, a shoe company, that sent 2 salesmen to different parts of Africa with shoes. And after arriving and seeing the people who lived in the 2 different villages where they went, the one salesman called back to the company and said, I'm coming home. Nobody here wears shoes. The other salesman called back to the company and said, send more shoes. Everybody here needs them. You get that? That's pretty good. Okay, second story. And this I read from an author who I used to really enjoy reading some years ago. And he said that every morning when he would leave the house to go to school, his mom would ask him, do you have your lunch? And then he would stop down the street to pick up one of his friends. And when his friend was leaving the house, his mom would ask him, do you have your books? Do you have your books? Stay with me. Third story. And this is, the question is asked, if you were stranded alone on a deserted island, and you could have one book, what one book would you want to have with you? And there's all kinds of answers, and in church, of course, people always say the Bible, the Bible. But one very intuitive young man's answer to the question, the one book he would like to have with him alone on a stranded island is How to Build Your Own Boat from Scratch. Good answer. Well, now, what I see as a connection between those 3 stories, the shoe salesman, nobody wears books, send more books, or nobody wears shoes, send more shoes, they all need them. Do you have your lunch? Do you have your books? And then, which book? The connection I see is, how do we see things? How do we see life? And as I think about it, I believe it's true that all our attitudes and all our behaviors in life come from the way we see life. The way we see things is going to determine everything about us and about the way we live. And I would like to ask the question, how important is what we believe, or how important is our way of seeing? And now's the story. Henry Nouwen, I'm pretty sure he has passed away, was a Catholic priest, a renowned Catholic priest, author of many books. He was also a teacher and a lecturer at some very prestigious schools. He was the kind of speaker that if Henry Nouwen was going to be there, people would come from great distances to hear Henry Nouwen, a brilliant man, and probably known around the world, at least in Catholic circles and outside of Catholic circles as well, Henry Nouwen. In the prime of Henry Nouwen's career, Do you know what he did? He walked away from all of that. He walked away from all of that, and he went to what I would understand to be a mental hospital. And there for a few years or several years, he became a personal caregiver for a young man who needed a personal caregiver. Can you imagine that? Why would anybody walk away from the life that he had to be the caregiver for one needy person that nobody knew anything about? It all depends on the way we see. The way that we see. What's life about? What really matters? It's all the way that we see. So this morning, we're going to look at a very short story that is about seeing, and I think it's about the way we see. And this story is about a blind man, but the story is also about Jesus' disciples, who aren't even mentioned in the story. But the story is also about you and me and the way that we see. And I forgot I was going to ask somebody to read it, and I forgot, so I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're all going to read it. And it's going to be up here thanks to Joe's good help. So let us read this story from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 8, verses 22 through 26 together. And they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up and said, "I see men, but they look like trees walking." And then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he opened his eyes. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, "Do not even enter the village." Bethsaida. They came to Bethsaida. Can you picture a footprint? Not in a shoe, but just a bare foot. The map I was looking at, I saw the Sea of Galilee, and it reminded me of a footprint. Now picture the footprint facing northwest. Picture your footprint facing northwest, and then just slightly move it a little further south than northwest. That's the Sea of Galilee. And up there around the big toe of the Sea of Galilee in that direction is where Jesus spent much of his life, right there around the big toe of the Sea of Galilee. And Bethsaida is one of those towns that's right there where Jesus spent most of his life. Jesus came to Bethsaida. And some people came to Jesus, and they brought with them a blind man. And it only makes sense. They begged. They didn't ask, but they begged Jesus, and not to heal the man, but to touch him. Obviously thinking if Jesus touches the man, he will be healed and he will be able to see. There's reason for thinking that. A leper came to Jesus, and what did Jesus do against all of the right social norms? Jesus touched a leper, and what happened? the leper was healed. There was a woman who had been bleeding for, some accounts say 12 years, some accounts, I believe, say 20 years. She had been bleeding for many years, and she came up, sort of snuck up behind Jesus, and she just touched the hem of his robe, and what happened? She was healed. People were brought to Jesus asking him to just touch them, and if he touched them, they were healed. So it makes sense. They bring a blind man to Jesus. Won't you please just touch this man that he might be healed? And what did Jesus do? He took the blind man by the hand and he led him out of the village. Then this sounds a little gross. He spit on his eyes. And then he laid his hands on him. He asked him, do you see anything? I have a thought that I wrote down here I'd share with you, and you can do with whatever you want it for you. I'm speaking personally. My way of regaining sight is probably not God's way of regaining sight. Just touch the guy, come on. My way of regaining sight is probably not God's way of regaining sight. Now, you may have heard Pastor Mike share one of his nicknames for me. Sometimes he calls me Methuselah. Now, in case you don't know why that is, according to Genesis 5, Methuselah lived to be, I believe it was 969 years old. I don't think Mike calls me Methuselah because he thinks I'm as old as Methuselah. He calls me Methuselah because he thinks I knew Methuselah when he lived way back there in Genesis chapter 5. Don't burst Mike's bubble, but I'm not quite that old. But I am, I'm getting close to 69. And after growing up in a Christian home for the past, within about a month now of 48 years, I've been a determined follower of Jesus. So that's some years. But I want to tell you this, in all those years, and you may find this hard to believe, I find it incredible. In all those years, God has never asked me even one time how he should do something. Not even one time has God ever asked me how he should do something. Can you believe that? Not only that, God's never even asked me my opinion or my thought about anything. Incredible. I think you know what, I hope you know what I'm saying. I guess that's sarcasm or whatever. You know, I'm making a point. God's way of regaining sight. My way of regaining sight is probably not God's way. And I'm not God. God has his ways. Probably not my ways. Some of you are familiar with the Naaman Center. The Naaman Center. Do you know where the Naaman Center got its name? If you look into the Old Testament book of 2 Kings in chapter 5, you read about a man named Naaman, who was the commander of the Syrian army. And he was a very great man and a great commander. But something happened to Naaman. He got leprosy. Well, it just so happened that there was from one of their conquests, they had brought some Israelites back to the land of Syria, and there was this young girl who was now working as a servant, as a maid in the home of Naaman. And when Naaman got leprosy, the maid said to somebody in the home, there's a prophet in Israel. And if Naaman would go to the prophet in Israel, he would be healed of his leprosy. Well, word came to Naaman. Naaman went to the king, told him all about it, and the king said, well, go right to Israel and let this prophet heal you. Naaman took some of his men and chariots, and they're off to Israel. And they go to the king of Israel. King says, hey, don't get me in this. I can't do anything. Don't get me in the middle of this. You go find the prophet. So he goes and he finds the prophet Elisha. And you know what Elisha did? This is the commander of the Syrian army. And what Elisha did, he sent one of his servants, a messenger, out to Naaman. And he says to Naaman, well, Elisha's got a message for you. Elisha says, go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River, and you'll be cleaned. See what Naaman's reaction was. Naaman's going to the prophet. Naaman was angry and went away saying, behold, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in a rage. He wasn't expecting to be told to go wash himself 7 times in that muddy Jordan River. Come on, you can do better than that, prophet Elisha. But the men who were with Naaman had a little better sense than Naaman did. And they kind of said to him, well, you came to be healed. Is it really going to hurt? Is it going to really be so awful just to do what he told you to do? And so Naaman went, and he washed himself 7 times in the Jordan River. And you know what happened? He was healed. He was healed. It wasn't Naaman's idea about how to do it, but it was God's. My way of seeing, and I'm not even going to say it's probably not God's way of seeing. My way of seeing is not God's way of seeing. And no matter how many Methuselah years I have behind me, I'm still so blind in so many ways. My way of seeing is not God's way of seeing. I don't know if you've ever heard of a woman named Corrie ten Boom. She passed away, I think, in the 1980s. She was in her 90s when she passed away. She traveled the world with an incredible message of love and forgiveness. Love and forgiveness. And do you know how she learned her message of love and forgiveness? Not my way. God's way. She learned an incredible message of love and forgiveness, spending about 2 years in a Nazi concentration camp, where she saw her sister die, and where she learned later her elderly father died before he ever got there. They were sent to a Nazi concentration camp because out of the love in their hearts, they were trying to help Jews escape from death at the hands of the Nazis. And for that reason, she spent about 2 horrible years in a Nazi concentration camp. But her message was one of love and forgiveness. One of the things she's known for saying is, there is no pit so deep that he is not there. And she learned that. She learned a new way of seeing because of time in a Nazi concentration camp. Who would send a person to a Nazi concentration camp that their eyes might be open to see in a new way? My way of seeing is not God's way of seeing. So Jesus touched the man and then asked him, "Do you see anything?" And the man replied, "Ooh, I see men, but they look like trees. And they're walking." I spent a few months in the spring of 1982 doing an internship in the Allentown State Hospital. And there I was doing that under the chaplain of the state hospital. Confession time, is that okay? I didn't like the chaplain. I really did not like the chaplain. And I thought I had good reason for not liking him. But I've grown a little bit since then, and now I realize why I didn't like the chaplain. Because my way of seeing is not God's way of seeing. And I could not see the value of this man's life in my life at the time. But now I can see it differently. I've grown a little bit. But he did tell me about one sermon he preached. Very simple message. And wow, I wish I could only preach a sermon that good. His sermon was very simple, and it was this: we love things and use people. God wants us to love people and use things. Isn't that good? We love things and use people. God wants us to love people and use things. We love chocolate. We love all kinds of food, don't we? We love our new fill in the blank. We love weekends. Those days off. We love to go to. We love. What do we love? Fill in the blank. We love things and things and things and things. Mark chapter. This is Mark chapter 12, Joe, 29 to 31. I might have misled you on that one too. You got that one right. Jesus was asked, what's the most important commandment? The most important is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God. It doesn't say, and you shall love all the things the Lord your God gives you. No, it says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no other commandment greater than these. I'm not seeing anything there about loving things. It's all about loving people. use things, love people. When my wife and I were first married, we knew a very dear woman by the name of Edith. She was 89 years old when we first met her. And she had to be at least 90, and maybe she was 91 when Debbie went to visit her one December. Now, you know what's in December, Christmas, and that becomes part of the story. So Debbie goes to visit her in December. She's 90 or 91 years old. And so Debbie asked her what she was doing. And you know what this dear 90 or 91-year-old woman said she was doing? Oh, this is great. She said, "I'm baking cookies for the elderly." Can you beat that? I'm baking cookies for the elderly. Now here's a woman who could see probably a lot better than I've yet been able to see. And she saw that the most important thing is to love God and love your neighbor. She's 90 or 91 years old. And the only thing she really cares about is what's something good that I can do for some. She ought to be sitting home waiting for somebody to bring her cookies. But all she's thinking about is the good that she can do for somebody else. It's a way of seeing. And I'd like to say two more things about this because, you know, trees, he saw people and they looked like trees walking. And I just want to ask you, as I ask myself, how often do I look at people like they're a tree or some other thing that I can use, rather than looking at people as people whom I ought to love? How often do I look at people as trees or whatever I see them as people who should serve me and do something for me, instead of seeing people as people whom I should love? So with that, let me say two little things here I want to stick in. One is, and I'm talking to men now, because I don't know what it is to be a woman and looking at a man. But I do know what it is to be a man and look at women. And men, how often do we look at women as objects who are here to be useful for our purposes or our pleasures? God did not create women for our pleasure and our purposes. God created women to be our partners because they make us better. They're not objects to be used for our benefit in any way. Thought I should throw that in there. The other thing is, when I read the Bible, the more I read the Bible, the more I see that there is so much depth to the Bible that I'll never be able to see all the depth of the Bible. And that's what keeps me coming back. There's the heart of it. Love God and love your neighbor, but there's so much depth to it. And I may say, oh yeah, I know the Bible. There is so much depth to the Bible. I'll never know the Bible. I'll never know the Bible. Explore the depths of the Bible. Don't be satisfied with a surface reading and think you know it. The depths of the Bible speak to the depths of the heart and the depths of the soul. And they get a hold of us way down deep. Those are the two things I wanted to say. Thanks for listening. So, then Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man again on his eyes, and the man's sight was restored, and he could see clearly. Now, I just want to give you one little word there that I see. It's for all of us, I believe, and that word is hope. That word is hope. And maybe there's a lot that you can't see very clearly. And maybe you think you've been trying and you see a little more than you used to, but there's so much you really can't see yet. You really don't get it. You really don't understand, but there's hope. I think this is also a story of hope. The man could see clearly. Now let me talk a little bit, especially how this is a story about the disciples, as it's also a story about you and me. So Jesus called his disciples to follow him. 12 men, okay? 12 men. They followed him. And they never really got it. They spent as far as we know, every day of their lives for 3 years with Jesus. And they came to see a lot more than they used to see. They came to understand a lot more than they used to understand. But they still didn't really understand. They still really didn't get it. They still really didn't see. And so the story of the healing of this man is also it's the story of the disciples. That although they were with Jesus and they began to see better than they used to, they still could not see clearly. And I want to say that's you and me. We spend time with Jesus and we come to see perhaps better than we used to, but we still really don't see. There's still so much we really don't get. And some examples are coming up in next week and in weeks to come as we go on with the Gospel of Matthew. So next week, and Daniel will preach, next week we have Jesus asking his disciples, "Who do you say I am?" And we have Peter jumping right in. Aha! Ha, ha. Call on me, Jesus. Call on me. I know. You are the Messiah. You are the Christ. I know. Jesus says, "You're right." 2 seconds later, Jesus says, "And I'm going to Jerusalem, and I'm going to be killed." And the same Peter who says, "Call on me, Jesus. I know. Jesus says, "I'm going to Jerusalem. I'm going to be killed." And Peter says, "No way. No way. That's not happening." And Jesus says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." Peter could see. This is the Christ. But Peter couldn't see. The Christ was going to Jerusalem to die. And then Jesus made it worse. Jesus goes on to teach them, if anyone would follow me, they must deny themselves and take up their cross and then follow me. Whoa! We're talking about suffering. We're talking about maybe being killed, maybe dying to follow you. We got to correct something here. They could see, but they really couldn't see. How much is that you and me? We can see And maybe we think we can see and we understand so much. And the truth is more likely that we see and we understand so little. We see and we understand so little. A little later, and a couple of Jesus' disciples were arguing about, they're asking Jesus if they could sit at his right and his left hand when they come into the kingdom. And then all the disciples get into an argument about, well, you know, and what did Jesus say to them? Now we're back to Mark 12, Joe. Here, Jesus answered, the most important is no, not that one. The other Mark 12. Is it 41 to 45 or something like that? Oh, Mark 10. Thank you. And Jesus called them to him and said to them, you know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority of them, but it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant. May I confess to you again? I know so little about what it means to be a servant. Jesus said, if you want to be great, be a servant. But I'll say it again, I must confess to you, I know so little about being a servant. That's not Jim's way of seeing things. Jim's way of seeing things is let's do something great, important. And God's way is, let's be a servant. Servants don't get recognized. Servants don't get openly and outwardly rewarded. Servants just do what they do because it's the right thing to do. I know so little about being a servant. Do you know when the disciples finally got it and could see? It was after Jesus died and was resurrected. The last thing in the world they wanted for Jesus was to be killed, to die. And what a death he died. How could you suffer more in death than the crucifixion, the way we read the accounts of Jesus and his death? The last thing in the world they wanted for Jesus was that, and then what happened after he died? God raised him from the dead. And then the disciples could begin to see that suffering and death and servanthood is the way of life. Suffering and servanthood and death is the way of life, and they began to see. I think it was about 9 years ago, I went with 5 other men to the Philadelphia Zoo. And I think the first building we went into was the reptiles. I think it was. And 4 of the guys, man, they're just walking through, looking through window after window, and soon they're out the door going to the next whatever in the zoo. But there was one guy who just stood at the first glass enclosure and just kept looking. Well, because he was alone, I chose to stay with him. And we're looking. Well, I'm starting to see stuff. And so then finally we moved to the next thing, and we just stand there and we're looking and we're looking. And we were at the zoo several hours. And during the several hours that we were there, the other 4 guys, they walked through the entire zoo and saw everything 3 times. The guy I was with And me, because I chose to stay with him, we got to maybe 3 different, areas of the zoo to look at 3 different kinds of creatures in several hours. That's all we saw. The other 4 guys, they saw the entire zoo 3 times. We saw like 3 different kinds of animals 3 times in all those hours. Why? Why? Because the guy I was with saw that there's so much more to see than just, keep walking through and taking a look. There was so much more to see. And I can assure you that time I was at the zoo, I probably saw more than I've ever seen going through a zoo, no matter how many times I walked through. Are you following me on that? Kind of reminds me of when I was a boy, and I did grow up in a Christian home, and mother and dad were and still are the real deal when it comes to faith in Jesus. So they always provided me with daily devotional books. Well, didn't always read my daily devotions. That's another confession. Didn't always read. Seldom did I read my daily devotions. But what would happen is I would come to the end of a week or 2, and then maybe I'd start to feel a little guilty because I'm supposed to be reading these. So what I would do is I'd open the daily devotional book and kind of go through page after page and see if there's any neat stories I'd like to read. Seldom did I actually open the Bible and read the scripture that you're supposed to read with the devotions. And the Bible, I knew a lot of Bible stories, but I guess in a way to me it became boring. Oh, I know that story already. Oh, I know that story. I know Jesus said that. I already know that. So, I don't want to go over. I already know it. It gets a little boring. I do know that my life has changed a lot. I cannot get bored with this book. For one simple reason, and I'm going back to the depths of it. No matter how many times I read the same thing, every time I read it, if I give it its due attention, I find there's something more, there's something deeper than I've seen before that speaks to my heart. It speaks to the depths of my soul. There's something here. Now, what I've said here is that my way of regaining sight is not God's way of regaining sight, but then I've changed it to say my way of seeing is not God's way of seeing. I like to see. I'm glad I can see. But when it comes to seeing the things that we cannot see with our eyes, I like to see that as well. And in truth, I think I see so poorly. But I want to see more. I want to understand more of what life is really about and about how to really live life. I want to see and I want to understand so much more. And I can pray a simple prayer. Lord, open my eyes that I can see. God, open my eyes that I can see. Do you want to see? Do you want to know what life is really about and how to really live life to its fullest? God, God, open my eyes that I may see. God, open my eyes that I may see. May the Lord open your eyes. Amen.